everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix with my pal, James Junkin. Hey, James.
Roll Tide, man. It's getting cold down here in the South. I don't know how. I know you're freezing. We talked on the phone like 29 degrees. That scares me to death.
It was 29 degrees this morning when I went to my car, and I'm Dr. Martin, and James and I we'll commiserate over the cold, but it's one of these things is not like the other. James is complaining about 60 degrees, and I'm complaining about 29. So take that for what it will. So here we are again with another episode of the Risk Matrix. We're powered by Veriforce. Thank you, Veriforce, for giving us this venue to talk about up and coming issues in safety and current events, etc. Today we have a guest, Ken Fichtler from Gaize.ai. Ken leads Gaize, the company revolutionizing impairment detection for safety-sensitive environments. He's got cutting-edge ocular technology that detects real-time drug impairment in 6 minutes. Gaize is challenging how safety leaders think about compliance, worker protection, and what actually keeps people safe on the job. So we're going to be getting to Ken. Hi, Ken. We're going to be getting to you in a second here after James and I bat around a few rip from the headlines, if that works
Great.
for you.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Dr. Martin, I don't know if you saw this. The Chemical Safety Board just released a report about an incident that occurred in July of 2024. It was at a food processing facility in Sterling, Virginia. And in that particular incident, I found it very interesting that it sort of coincided with an article that I wrote about being prepared as a company, particularly in multi-employer locations, of which many of this particular incident was a multi-employer location, but it was at Cuisine Solutions Inc. food processing facility where they had an anhydrous ammonia leak. And as the emergency was progressing, workers evacuating, heading to their evacuation zones, encountered a visible white ammonia cloud, and 33 of them and went to the hospital. So, once again, we have a situation where we have a plan. I question whether or not we had practiced the plan, drilled the plan, had an opportunity to say, is there a way to notify people where the chemical leak is whatever. But moving from paper safety to real safety could have helped prevent 33 hospitalizations, 4 of which were serious, and 1 worker which ended up in intensive care.
So I agree with you there, James. I think that process safety is a big topic in a lot of these companies, food processing, especially because of refrigeration, etc. But what I will say is, my takeaway from that is a lot of our process safety work that we do for clients, they want to set it and forget it, right? They want a process safety management plan. They want to put things in place. They want to move forward, and then nobody ever does anything. They're not doing the drills. They're not doing the safety. They're not going back through and looking at the system and seeing how they can improve it over time. They're just doing it once, and maybe somebody takes a look at it every now and
Annually,
again.
maybe periodic, maybe,
right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the takeaway for me is that set it and forget it doesn't really work for many things when it comes to safety, especially as we evolve. And we'll be seeing as we talk to Ken today on the product that he has on the market, that with the constant evolution, we actually have to be looking at these things and looking at how we're responding to emergencies and all those types of things on a regular basis, not just periodic in print, but periodic in actual practice.
Absolutely. Big difference moving from the paper to what's actual, which kind of brings us into this topic today. Welcome, Ken, to the podcast in a discussion of that we've had numerous times on this podcast, always in the safety community, about impairment. And, 20 years ago when I first got into safety, impairment was easy because we had zero tolerance policies for everything. And then now we've had the evolution of the decriminalization of marijuana in state plans, You have recreational use that's allowed in some states, medicinal use that's allowed in some states. The focus has really shifted from what's in your blood, what is it that we can detect, to are you impaired on the job or not? And it seems like your company's come up with a pretty interesting product that's a little different than what we're used to seeing when it comes to impairment.
That's right.
So, if you could give our listeners a little bit about what Gaize originally started the company as, and what you're doing now.
Yeah.
I know that you went to the ASSP conference and you kind of showcased some of what your device can do. Tell us a little bit about that so that we can kind of dig into this.
Sure, my pleasure. The genesis of the company, really started when I was with the state of Montana, where I was director of economic development, and we were a medical cannabis state at the time, and I was pretty convinced we were going to become a recreational cannabis state. And so I spent some time trying to understand what the impacts would be. And in the course of doing that work, I discovered that there was no device that could check for impairment. And I learned that cannabis, and it turns out virtually every other drug, works very differently in the body than alcohol. And so, whereas you can simply measure the quantity of alcohol in the body and determine whether or not someone is experiencing impairment from that number, that doesn't work for cannabis. And it doesn't work for, it turns out, virtually every other drug. So, the reality of cannabis impairment really necessitated a new way of thinking about how we look at drug free workplaces. And so I spent quite a long time trying to understand the problem, and got a little bit obsessed with how this could be done. And ultimately, when my job was over and our governor was termed out, I thought this was the most important problem that I could solve. And I've got a background in technology and entrepreneurship, so looked like something that would be interesting. And we incorporated in January of 21. We brought product to market about 2 years later, and it's been a really interesting ride ever since. Today, we've got an amazing group of customers that encompasses some of the very largest safety sensitive employers in the country. And our technology basically is an ocular test for impairment. We look at eye movement, we look at pupil size, all through an automated testing technology, and evaluate the data that we capture to look for signs of impairment.
Okay. So what does that look like? I mean, so I mean, for a company, a large company they're bringing in your device. Do they
Yeah.
purchase the device? Do they rent it from you, or how do you roll out a plan that
Yeah,
uses your device in cooperation with other parts of their program?
sure. And it's basically a drop-in solution to an existing drug-free workplace policy. We work really well with existing chemical drug testing protocols and reasonable suspicion. I'll show you what the device looks like. So this is it. It's a VR headset basically, and put it
Okay.
on. Looks just like that. Looks like the
Yeah, that's what
Oculus.
I wore. That's
Sorry.
it. That's
Yeah,
that's
that's it.
what I wore. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Looks just like the Oculus your kids probably have, but this one has embedded eye tracking sensors, which capture extremely high precision data, as well as video. So basically, what companies end up doing when they want to adopt impairment detection technology is they first decide, do they want to use it proactively or reactively? And so by proactively, I mean, do they want to do random screening? Do they want to do some sort of surveillance screening on their employees and find out, are people coming to work while impaired before they cause an incident? Or do they want to use it reactively? So that would be post-incident, reasonable suspicion type instances. And we have a good mix of both. Our strong preference, of course, is the proactive methodology, where you're actually catching a lot of that behavior before it causes a problem. And what we find is that it produces an extremely prevalent deterrent effect against people showing up to work high. It's like aiming a video camera at the cash register. You just stop that behavior before it becomes a problem.
Okay. So let me just dig a little deeper into that. You know, I assume that as a deterrent, right, as a proactive use, that you're following this with drug testing, or your client is following with drug testing. Do you have data that basically looks at how accurate you are at detecting? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you bet. So our technology, basically what we did is we looked at, what are the ways that you can currently detect drug impairment, prior to the existence of our technology. And so what the tests are that we decided to use are the drug recognition expert tests. And these are used by the highest trained law enforcement officials. Exactly. And they're used to detect impairment from, not only cannabis, but every other drug category as well. And so what we did is we took the ocular testing portion of those tests and we programmed it to run the headset. We then did a bunch of primary research to understand, how accurate are we at detecting these same indicators of impairment. And what we found is that we are today over 98% accurate at detecting the same indicators of impairment that law enforcement look for.
Okay.
And so the indicators that you look for various drug categories changes. Each drug category is somewhat unique in how it impacts the eyes. But we're extremely accurate today. And in terms of how well does our technology agree with a later chemical drug test, it's virtually 1-to-1. It's very accurate. Where there can sometimes be challenges is when people are using novel substances. So I'll give you an example. We have got a customer in the Midwest. They had someone who was using a benzodiazepine. They had purchased off the internet. It was sold to them as Xanax. They were impaired on the job. We detected that they were impaired on the job. And in the course of kind of doing an interview before the chemical test, they admitted to this. They did the chemical test and they did not find Xanax. And so what they had done, it turns out, is they had purchased a novel research chemical benzodiazepine off the internet and were using that. And so a traditional drug test would have completely missed that. We were able to at least find the impairment, and then they were able to find out what that substance was in the course of the interview. But when there's disagreement, it's often something like that where there's a novel substance being used that's not on a drug panel.
So if I were going to use your technology, we saw the Ocular device a minute ago. It's really super cool. Does that require on location an internet connection? How does that work as far as connecting back to the software necessary to run the program?
The headset is completely portable, so you can go out in the field and use it. All you need to get results is an internet connection. So you can also do a test without internet connection, and then when you reconnect to the internet, get your results at that point. But you do have to have the ability to connect up to our models live in the cloud. We're capturing a large amount of data, which all has to be analyzed. So it just cannot be done on device with kind of current technology.
Mhm.
So it has to be pushed up to the cloud for analysis.
But the test itself can be performed in the field without an internet connection.
Correct.
And
Yep.
I think you said it takes approximately 6 minutes to perform the test. And then once we get to an internet connection, or if we have an internet connection, how long does it take to get the report back? And what would the report say?
It takes about 30 seconds to do the data processing, and then you would have the report in hand. So the test itself takes about 5.5 minutes. What we always tell our customers is in the course of 6 minutes, you'll have results in hand. Um, what the report shows is whether or not we're finding evidence of impairments. We have kind of a green, yellow, red flagging system where green is no sign of impairment, yellow would be inconclusive, and red would be we found impairment. When we have an impairment reading, we try to then understand what substance categories could be causing that impairment. And we make a recommendation on the confirmatory testing panel based on that. So that's the kind of information you get. If you want to dig deeper, we capture video evidence in the course of every test as well. That video evidence is something that is a very important piece of the defensibility of our product. So in the case where our customers were ever challenged in court, that's a human interpretable piece of evidence that they can show to the court. We can have expert witnesses come in and analyze, and we can find the same signs of impairment that a drug recognition expert would.
So the Ocular, let's talk about how that works for a
Yeah.
second, because I want to get to court and the legality of this and all this. And so she knows I'm all
I
over
knew
that.
that's where he was going to go. That
Okay?
was going to be my next question too. So, just up front, James and I both work on a lot of court cases. We work for a lot of companies that might use this technology, but we also know actually James a little better at it than I am. The questions that you get asked on the stand. So back to James' question. Let's talk a little bit more about like how the mechanics of the eye recognition and the movements work. And
Mhm.
then
So,
just be forewarned, James and I are going to hit you with some
absolutely,
legality.
absolutely. So you said it captures a video. Let's talk about what is it capturing in the video.
Sure.
Okay.
So the video is basically, if you can imagine, like this kind of shape. Um, and so basically what we're capturing is the eye movement and the pupil size.
Okay.
The eye movement and pupil size are both calculated to an extremely high level of precision. So 13 decimal places of radian accuracy for the gaze direction and 1/100th of a millimeter for the pupil size. All that is captured at 90 times per second per eye. So it's a very large amount of data. The video is infrared, so you don't get eye color, you don't get skin tone, you don't get really any identifying features out of that video. And so our law firm has looked at that and they have determined that that is not biometric, which is another nice advantage for our customers where they're not going to be kind of restricted in use by some of the biometric information privacy laws that are coming out. But that's basically what it looks like. It's a video of how the eyes are moving back and forth and the pupil size.
So you
Okay.
haven't been challenged on that biometric information yet, have you? I mean,
We have
because
not gone to court on, we have
I'm
not been
curious
challenged.
about that, right? Because I just first blush, I would say that would be biometric data, and that one of the things that your clients might have to have in place is some sort of permission,
Yeah.
right?
So
Because and a lot of times when we do these things in the workplace, we have to have permission to do it, and a lot of employees will not consent to having any personal information out
yeah,
there.
I
we
would
don't
argue
store
that they
any personally
consented to take the
identifiable
test,
information.
they consented to the collection, but that's for another day. But let's talk about the data though that you store.
Sure.
What data are you storing of individuals, and is there personal identifying information that's in the cloud, and how does it get there? So I go to administer Dr. Martin this test. Do I need her name, her date of birth? How does all this work so that we're tracking that data and identify this test goes with Dr. Martin?
Yeah.
Right, chain of custody.
Exactly. So we have decided, very, very early in the company that we didn't want to store PII, personally identifiable information. So what we store, what we capture is a reason for the test. So that's typically random, post-incident, reasonable suspicion, things like that. And then we capture an employee ID number. So that's typically a unique identifier. We ask that it's not a name or a social security number. So that gets entered, and at that point, you can start the test. We're also capturing the location of the test, the time, date, who performed the test, what device, software version, all that stuff. When the test is running, what we're capturing again is the gaze direction and the pupil size. We also capture some head movement information from the accelerometer and the video. The video is, I think, what could closest be thought of as biometric information, but we're not storing any of the personally identifiable information, which is why it is not. So we have no ability within my company to correlate a test back to an individual. The company has to do that based on the employee ID number that they're entering.
Okay.
And your recommendation, I believe it was for most companies, is then if there is a positive or an indication of impairment to follow up with some other um, type of testing, normally in the form of hair, blood, or urinalysis test. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And the reason for that is that, impairment is one piece of the equation and a chemical drug test is another piece of the equation. But we think the totality of that information really allows an employer to make a very confident employment decision. That process, we think, is the gold standard for how you can think about and how you can address drug-free workplace. Having, just the chemical drug test is leading some employers into situations where they're being sued for not establishing that someone was impaired when they took action. In places where cannabis is legal, in particular, medical users are suing employers based on being terminated. And but for having an impairment test, that's probably a rational decision that they're making. The employer really needs to establish that that person is experiencing impairment if they're going to take action based on past use for a legal substance. Otherwise, it's like telling someone they can't have a beer on the weekend.
Yeah,
Right.
right. So James and I, like I said, we work in different spaces. He works mostly in oil and gas, and I work in
Mhm.
with construction companies. And I'll let James chime in on this. I've seen a lot of companies go away from any type of proactive means altogether, and they use something like what you're describing in your product, and drug tests after the fact, right? The
Yep.
drug-free workplace kind of has gone away, and it's kind of like, well, we hope nothing happens, but if it does, now we're scrambling. And
Right.
James, maybe you want to speak to that too. But I,
Now,
I, I know with construction, it's kind of become, at least with my clients, don't ask, don't tell.
Hmm.
I know several companies who've moved away in pre-employment screening from even discussing marijuana because they're terrified of repercussions in the law.
Yep.
So this is my evaluation of the court cases that have happened in state court and federal court across the country. There is not a single court in this land that will allow you to come to work impaired.
Exactly.
Now, you may still have in your system amounts of different impairment substances, whether, we're talking about narcotics, alcohol, whatever, right? And this issue became really prominent when we got into marijuana because you could have a user, even a habitual user, who had it in their system at volume, but yet not be impaired in the instant. And people were being terminated because they failed drug tests, either randoms or post incident in most cases, right? And so everybody was looking for an off ramp of where to go. And now we've got technology that can assist us
Hmm.
in this. So, one of the things I wanted to ask is training, reasonable suspicion training, having a justification for documenting whether a person should be having these type of testing. Is that something that you recommend that companies do? Is that something that you provide as part of your service, I guess, when you train companies on how to use your device?
We absolutely recommend reasonable suspicion training. I think we're a great piece of technology, but we're not a replacement for a human being in and amongst the job, the population of workers, and finding things like that. And they need to understand what they're looking for. Some of these substances are very subtle, and they can be very difficult to distinguish from someone who's just tired. And so it's really important that supervisory level employees are able to recognize the signs of drug impairment. And it's commonly these days not just the smell of weed anymore. It's
Right.
too easy to get a
The
vape
smell of
pen.
weed is everywhere.
Yeah, and it's everywhere. So um, I think it's really critical, and we work with several providers of reasonable suspicion training, both virtual and in person, and we always recommend that. I'm always astonished, actually, at the number of employers we talk to that haven't had reasonable suspicion training in any recent memory.
Yeah. And again, I think that's because a lot of these workforces are just kind of saying, I'm afraid of the repercussions here, like James said, and let's just leave that for another day.
Hmm.
Maybe what the solution, or one of the solutions, could be is an impairment-free workplace, as opposed to naming it a drug-free workplace. Because before we got on the show, you said that your device doesn't do fatigue. I would hope that in the future, maybe that's something that you would wrap into your device, because fatigue is another factor, at least in construction, that impairs you, that makes you not fit to work, right?
Hmm.
And so I like, maybe a twist on the old drug-free workplace, impairment-free or fit to work workplace,
Yeah.
and relying on something like Gaize and other technology to help us say, I mean, I'm sorry, I can't have you work today, right? Or it's reasonable suspicion that you're not fit to work, and here it's green is fit to work, red is not fit to work, and
Hmm.
that's what you submit to when you come to work for a company. I mean, I,
Exactly.
I don't know if that's way off base. James, what do you think about that?
Well, whatever we call it from a nomenclature standpoint, that's where the courts directed us. Are you impaired or not impaired? I could even see this device being used in a proactive manner to make sure people are fit for duty um, as a work crew, as a company, especially if they're performing safety sensitive functions. And each state defines what a safety sensitive function. Some states don't even define what a safety sensitive function is. Me as a safety professional, if you get hurt and end up on my OSHA 300 log, it's pretty safety sensitive to me, right? Right? So not everybody sees it from that standpoint, but you could use this type of technology as a proactive means. Maybe, hey, we're at the JHA meeting. Let's all get our thing done, make sure we're fit for duty to go to work today. And if not, there are other steps that can be taken. And it might also be used as a measure for prevention in the sense that I might not want to do this because I might be impaired when I come to work. Dr. Martin and I care about getting workers home safe. That's what we care about. And impaired workers are a threat to themselves and the other people that work around them. I just had a case where this particular issue came up, and now we're looking at the toxicology reports that come from the medical examiner, right, to determine whether impairment was a factor in this.
Mm-hmm.
So that all gets into comparative negligence, contributory negligence, and all the things that are going to be sorted out if there is a wrongful death lawsuit that's filed, or it's going to be part of the case that the company will make with OSHA when it comes to unpreventable employee misconduct defenses. So these are things to think about as you're developing your policy, what I would call a fit for duty policy, right? That we're not impaired for any reason, prescribed to you, not prescribed to you, fatigue, not getting enough rest, over the counter medications. I don't know about you guys, I can't take Benadryl. I'm like a zombie if I take
Yeah.
Benadryl. Now my dog, my dog, brother Cole takes Benadryl because he itches all the time. It doesn't phase him at all. Knocks me out. Papa's out for 2 days if I take Benadryl. So you don't want me driving and operating heavy machinery if I've taken Benadryl.
So yeah, so let's I want to circle back a little bit to implementing your device, right? You
Mhm.
talked about a company might purchase the headset or whatever. How do they keep the headset properly calibrated, let's say, right? Because you're talking about really, really, really fine measurements here, right?
Yep.
And I'm assuming that it comes from the factory or from you, calibrated. How often do they need to recalibrate? Is it just one and done? How does that work?
So we recalibrate every single time we run a test. What we do is a number of system checks to make sure that everything's working properly. We look for whether or not the eye tracking sensors are sort of able to identify the pupils, and they will automatically find the pupils and then align themselves to be able to best capture that data. And so that basically allows us to make sure the system is working properly. We're also going to be doing, in the course of that calibration, some checks on the individual to make sure they're a good fit to go through the test. So that'll look for some, common medical things like unequal pupil size, as an example, that could indicate a head injury. We look for whether or not their eyes are able to both track a stimulus relatively equally. We need two functioning eyeballs to go through the test, basically. And so a prosthetic eye or blindness or advanced cataracts are not a fit. So we do some things like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's interesting. Like, I mean, is there a long list of things that disqualify somebody, or is that the short
Not
list?
terribly. Things like photosensitive epilepsy are another condition we don't allow to go through. Advanced neurological disease. We actually include a card. I should have one. I don't. With every headset that tells you what conditions you're allowed to, or what conditions you're not allowed to go through the system with. And it's a short list. That card is intended to be read to people before they do the test, so that they can alert someone if that's the case, and then a medical review officer could confirm that.
Yeah, neat, neat.
How difficult is it to train someone to administer the test to workers?
It's relatively easy. We do trainings in about an hour, and basically what we do is we run through how to conduct a test, what the test results mean, what's the background of these tests, some basic troubleshooting on the device, kind of the ins and outs of the product, and we have everyone do some fitment exercises. Fitting the headset is really important, so we got to make sure that that is done properly. And then, at the end of that, we issue a training credential so that people are able to show that they were trained by us. We, of course, retain that so we know who was trained. And then there's, refresher materials that we provide as well so they can go back and study up if they need to. What we found is that often there's, when a company is doing reactive testing in particular, there can be a period of, maybe a month that goes by and they haven't done a test. We want people to be able to be up to speed on the headset all the time and not have some detriment in how to use it.
Cool.
But the
Do
training
you
side
have
really
any
has.
published articles, or do you publish some of your results in that on your website so that people who are looking at, I mean, listen, I'm dying to get my hands on something like this just to play with it, right?
Yeah,
With my workers, but I think our listeners would be interested to see, the efficacy of using your device against, the drug tests that come back and stuff like
yeah.
that. Do you publish that stuff on your website or?
We are trying to. So we have done a number of clinical trials, including the world's largest inhaled cannabis impairment clinical trial. We also did an alcohol trial. We did an edibles trial. We're in a psychotropic prescription drug trial as we speak. We're standing up trials for opiates and stimulants, kratom, and fatigue. So that's kind of the 2026 plan. The trials we've completed so far, we've shown excellent efficacy. We are in the process of getting those peer reviewed so they'll then be published and very clear outcomes and everything, and everyone can trust that data. We have been published in a small medical journal that I believe is on our website. We also have the data that shows that we are 98% accurate at detecting these indicators of impairment. So that's relatively easy to produce. We update our models all the time to deal with edge cases that we find, but that overall percentage just ticks up a little bit over time.
I find that number very interesting. I was meeting with a very large drug testing, nationally recognized consortium. And one of the things that they were telling me here recently was the quick tests that are performed on site, typically using your analysis, false positives 50% of the time.
What? I didn't know that. Holy.
That's crazy.
So when you're doing that, it's a coin toss, and I can understand if we get a false positive, we end up taking a worker out of the field, saying you tested positive, all the anxiety the workers got, the defensiveness the workers got, and we get over here and find out that no, there wasn't anything wrong with them to begin with, and what they were saying was the truth. I just don't find that very reliable. I mean, 50% of the time, what are we doing here? So it sounds like your technology helps close the gap till we can get to a trusted testing facility to do a reliable chemical test. 98% accuracy sounds pretty good.
It's excellent. And when we see people who, would produce what you traditionally call a false positive, they actually are exhibiting the indicator of impairment. But sometimes they have, a medical condition they were not aware of, or that's the primary one. There's, a small subset of the population that cannot cross their eyes. And so one of the tests challenges you to cross your eyes. So that's always a bit of a confounding one. We're working through that. I think it's a really interesting one because that test in particular is great for cannabis impairment, but we've got something like 7% of the population that can't cross their eyes. So we're detecting actual lack of convergence, but it is a different causal factor than what you're expecting. So we're trying to create some novel indicators of impairment that will actually corroborate or drop those people out of a potential positive. And I think we're getting close on those, so I'm excited to get them out. But when we find something, it's there. The causation is typically drugs, and when there's a false positive, it's usually that medical side, or a drug that they used that is not being tested for on the drug panel, and those are those are particularly challenging. We actually work with a number of law enforcement officers to help us understand some of the kind of oddball things that we find, and occasionally it is the novel substances.
Yeah. Very cool stuff, Ken. Very cool stuff. I'm going to your website and I'm gonna look up
Right.
some of that stuff. And if you get to the point where you want to put something in a safety journal, you give James and I a call and we'll
Absolutely.
write you
Yeah.
something
As
up.
soon as we have published research, I'll reach out.
I'll just say this: don't let your fit for duty policy go up in smoke. You could reuse Gaize's Ocular technology, right?
That's
Exactly.
right.
To create a
You're
more
hired.
reliable test and a perhaps safer workforce. Thank you so much for coming on today, Ken. I think it's really cool how your technology works. Seems very easy. I took the test myself out at ASSP. It's probably one of the easiest tests in the world to pass, and I just thought it was really neat.
He didn't
Having
say
the
you passed,
Ocular.
James. He didn't say
He
you
didn't say I
passed.
passed. He didn't say I passed.
He said you took it.
Yeah, roll tide.
Yeah.
The results are confidential. The results are confidential. Roll tide, indeed.
Well, yeah, thank you again for Ken for coming. And James, let's talk a little bit about how people can get a hold of Ken first, Gaize.ai.
Correct.
And I'm expecting they can go to your webpage and send you an email and do all those fancy things.
Yeah,
If they
it's
want to
all
learn more.
very easy to do. Gaize is how you spell it. Gaize,
And it's
Gaize.
.ai, right?
.ai. Yeah.
Okay, great. And James, how can they get a hold of us?
Hey, we're everywhere. We're everywhere, baby. You can follow us on LinkedIn, on Spotify, on YouTube, on Veriforce's LinkedIn page, on our own LinkedIn page. There's literally Apple Podcasts. Anywhere you get podcasts, the risk matrix is there. And we
Alexa,
think, and
play
where?
Alexa, play the Risk podcast.
Absolutely. That's the newest thing. Alexa, play the Risk Matrix podcast, and it will bring us up in our 117th episode. So I always started doing this. I want to challenge our listeners. If you learned something today, I would like you to like and subscribe. You must like and subscribe. If you enjoyed the podcast today, you must like and subscribe. And if you understand what Roll Tide means, you must like and subscribe to the podcast to get the latest episodes of the Risk Matrix. We're here for you, baby. Roll Tide.
All right. And thank you again, Ken, for joining us today. And until next time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Awesome.
Till next time, y'all keep bringing those workers home safe from those hazardous jobs. Out.